She strutted around like she owned the lake. I let her keep thinking that, until I proved I literally owned everything underneath it. Karen Whitmore had turned harassing my disabled veteran father into her personal mission. Every morning, she'd patrol Pine Ridge Estates in her golf cart, measuring distances and issuing fake citations like some suburban dictator. The woman actually threatened to have my 72-year-old dad arrested for fishing from his wheelchair with a pop-up tent for shade. These HOA tyrants thought they could intimidate us into abandoning the public lakefront access my family had used for 3 generations. Karen had no idea she was messing with an environmental consultant who knew how to read property records. While she was busy playing government official, I was discovering that my grandfather's mineral rights meant I could buy her entire neighborhood and convert it into a public park. What would you do if some HOA busybody tried to criminalize your disabled parents' fishing therapy? Drop a comment if you're watching from a lake town, because this takedown is going to be absolutely beautiful. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Jake, and 6 months ago, I inherited my grandfather's lakefront cabin in Millbrook, Minnesota. Nothing fancy, just a weathered cedar place where 3 generations of my family learned to fish, swim, and appreciate the simple things in life. The timing couldn't have been better. I work as an environmental consultant, mostly remote these days, which lets me care for my dad. He's a Vietnam vet, wheelchair-bound after an IED took his legs in '68, and those weekly fishing trips aren't just recreation, they're doctor's orders for his PTSD. Something about the rhythm of casting, the smell of pine needles warming in morning sun, the distant call of loons across misty water. It centers him in ways that 40 years of VA therapy never could. Millbrook Lake sits half on public land, half surrounded by private developments. For decades, old-timers and newcomers coexisted just fine. Sure, there was the occasional grumble about jet skis or loud music, but nothing serious. Then the Chicago money started flowing in. Enter Linda Whitmore, though. Everyone calls her Karen behind her back, and you'll see why. 52 years old, moved up from some gated suburb 2 years ago with her developer husband. Within 6 months, she'd appointed herself the unofficial queen of Pine Ridge Estates, the McMansion development that sprouted like mushrooms after a rain on what used to be my grandfather's favorite duck hunting spot. Karen's the type who measures her neighbor's grass height with an actual ruler, times their guests' parking duration with a stopwatch. She'd already scored some victories, got the weekend food truck banned because it attracted undesirable elements, forced old Mrs. Peterson to repaint her mailbox because the shade of blue wasn't community compliant, the kind of petty power that goes straight to someone's head like cheap wine. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late September. Dad and I set up our usual spot at the public boat launch, him in his wheelchair on the dock, me with a folding chair and our tackle box. The air had that crisp bite that promises good fishing, and the metallic taste of anticipation was already on my tongue. That's when I noticed Dad squinting in the bright sun, so I grabbed our little pop-up tent from the truck. Nothing elaborate, just a basic beach shelter, the kind you'd buy at any sporting goods store. Set it up on the public grass for shade during his 4-hour therapy sessions. We'd been fishing maybe 30 minutes when I heard the crunch of designer heels on gravel. Karen marched over like she was leading a parade, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other. She was wearing what looked like a tennis outfit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Excuse me," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "This tent violates our community's visual pollution ordinance." She started measuring distances between the tent stakes like she was conducting a forensic investigation. I looked up from tying a fishing knot. "Ma'am, this is public land. Check the county maps." Her face went red as a stop sign. "I don't care what some outdated map says. This is affecting property values, and I have authority to issue citations." She pulled out a stack of official-looking papers. "That's a $500 daily fine if this structure isn't removed immediately." Dad caught my eye and gave me that look, the same one he'd use when neighborhood bullies picked on me as a kid. "Don't make a scene, son. Just pack up and go." So we did. Folded up our tent, packed our gear, and drove home in silence while Karen stood there filming us with her iPhone like she'd just solved the Kennedy assassination. But that night I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole encounter felt off. So I started digging through the box of old papers Grandpa left, Medid records, survey maps, mineral rights documents dating back to the 1950s. That's when I found it, the original land sale agreement from when Pine Ridge Estates was built. Turns out Grandpa was smarter than I'd given him credit for. He'd sold the surface rights to that development, sure, but he'd kept the mineral rights, all of them, including the valuable limestone deposits sitting directly under Karen's house. Karen wasn't done with us, not by a long shot. The next morning, I found the first citation tucked under my truck's windshield wiper. Professional-looking thing, printed on what appeared to be official county letterhead, complete with seal and everything. Notice of environmental violation, it read in bold red letters. Unauthorized camping structure on protected lakefront property. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 48 hours or matter will be escalated to appropriate authorities. At the bottom, Karen had signed it, Linda Whitmore, Deputy Environmental Compliance Officer, Millbrook County. I had to admire the audacity. The woman had brass, I'll give her that. Dad wheeled over as I was reading it, coffee mug balanced on his lap. "What's that official-looking nonsense?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it was garbage. "Karen's trying to play government official," I said, waving the fake citation. "Claims she's got authority to fine us for fishing." Dad snorted the same sound he'd make when politicians promised to fix the VA. In my day, we had a name for people who impersonated federal officers. That got my attention. I pulled out my phone and called Millbrook County's main office. "Hi, I'm calling about one of your environmental compliance officers, Linda Whitmore." Long pause. "Sir, we don't have anyone by that name on our staff. We don't even have a deputy environmental compliance officer position." Bingo. Karen was impersonating a government official, a federal crime punishable by up to 3 years in prison, even for something as simple as fake parking tickets. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I drove back to the lake and set up a security camera aimed at the boat launch, hidden in the reeds where nobody would spot it. If Karen wanted to play federal agent, I'd document every second of her performance. Sure enough, she showed up the next day in her golf cart, wearing what looked like a mall security guard's badge she'd bought online. The camera caught everything. Karen placing another fake citation on an elderly couple's car, threatening to call the real authorities if they didn't move their lawn chairs, even measuring the distance between their vehicle and the water with her trusty tape measure. The sweet smell of victory was already in the air, but I wasn't the only one who'd noticed Karen's campaign of harassment. That's when Bob approached me. 73 years old, been fishing this lake since before Karen was born, hands permanently stained with tobacco and fish scales. The kind of old-timer who notices everything but doesn't say much unless it matters. "That Whitmore woman's been making life hell for everyone," he said, casting his line with the practiced ease of 5 decades. "Got Mrs. Garcia's grandson's so scared he won't even bring his kids to swim anymore, claims they're disturbing the peace with their splashing." Bob squinted across the water toward Pine Ridge Estates. "Course, funny thing about that development, your granddad always said he kept something when he sold that land. Called it his insurance policy." My pulse quickened. "What kind of insurance policy?" "The kind that's buried in county records, son. The kind most folks don't bother reading." Bob reeled in his line and gave me a knowing look. "Might want to dig deeper into what your granddad really owned under all that fancy real estate." Meanwhile, Karen was escalating. She'd recruited her husband's contractor buddy to accidentally block the public parking area with construction equipment. Big orange cones, authorized vehicles only signs. Even hired some rent-a-cop company to patrol and threaten towing. The sound of diesel engines rumbling at dawn became our new wake-up call, as legitimate public access got choked off day by day. Elderly visitors would arrive, see the fake official barriers, and just turn around rather than risk a confrontation. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. While she was busy playing traffic cop, I was documenting her husband's construction violations. Unpermitted dock extension jutting 15 feet into protected waters. Illegal LED floodlights blazing all night, disrupting migratory bird patterns. Filled dirt dumped in wetland areas without any environmental impact study. I filed a formal complaint with the county about the impersonation, complete with photos, video evidence, and copies of all her fake citations. Then I made an anonymous tip about the construction violations. Let the real authorities sort out who was actually breaking the law around here. The taste of irony was sweet as honey. Karen wanted to play government official so badly she was about to meet some real ones. But the real breakthrough came when I started researching her husband's development company. Public records showed they were hemorrhaging money, $847,000 in back taxes, property liens on 3 different lots, even an ongoing EPA investigation for wetlands violations on another project across the county. Karen's house wasn't just her castle, it was collateral for a sinking ship. Karen wasn't just angry anymore, she was strategic, and that made her dangerous. 3 days after my complaint hit the county office, she launched what I can only describe as a social media blitzkrieg. She created a Facebook group called Millbrook Lake Community Standards, and somehow recruited 47 members overnight. The post started innocent enough photos of litter, complaints about loud music, the usual neighborhood watch stuff. Then she posted our pictures. Dad and I, captured without our knowledge, appeared in an album titled Vagrant Camping Concerns. The captions made my blood boil. Unidentified men setting up unauthorized structures, potential homeless encampment forming, property values at risk from transient activity. She'd even zoomed in on Dad's wheelchair and fishing gear, making it look like we were hauling around shopping carts full of suspicious belongings. The comment section turned into a digital lynch mob. People who'd never seen us in person were demanding action and sharing the posts with dog whistle language about keeping our community safe and protecting what we've worked for. Karen had turned my disabled veteran father into the neighborhood boogeyman. But while she was building her online army, I was conducting reconnaissance of my own. My environmental lawyer friend Sarah had spent the weekend diving through county records, and what she found made my mineral rights discovery look like small change. Karen's husband didn't just owe back taxes, his development company was drowning in debt. 3 different projects under investigation, contractor liens piling up like autumn leaves, and here's the kicker. Their house was leveraged to the hilt as collateral for business loans. Jake, Sarah said over coffee, her voice carrying that excitement lawyers get when they smell blood in the water. If his company goes under, Karen loses everything. The house, the cars, probably even that golf cart she drives around like a patrol vehicle. But the real bombshell was in the mineral rights documentation Sarah had authenticated. Mineral rights trump surface rights in most states. If you own what's underground, you can access it even through someone else's property. The limestone deposits under Pine Ridge Estates were worth approximately $2.3 million in extraction value, and case law was crystal clear about access rights. You could literally drive quarrying equipment through her front yard, Sarah explained, and there's not a damn thing she could do to stop you. The taste of possibility was intoxicating, but Karen wasn't finished with her escalation campaign. She convinced 3 of her compliant neighbors to file noise complaints about our disruptive fishing activities. According to the reports, Dad's wheelchair was somehow damaging sensitive wetland areas, and our tackle box constituted excessive equipment storage. The absurdity would have been hilarious if it wasn't so vicious. Then she crossed a line that made my jaw clench with rage. When the Rodriguez family showed up for their weekly fishing trip, kids with cartoon character fishing poles, grandparents with folding chairs, and a cooler full of sandwiches Karen called ice. Not the police, not the county, but Immigration and Customs Enforcement, claiming suspicious individuals were establishing an unauthorized encampment on public land. The fact that the Rodriguez family had been coming to this lake longer than Karen had lived in Minnesota didn't matter to her. The sight of a Hispanic family enjoying the same public access she was trying to eliminate was apparently more than her suburban sensibilities could handle. That's when I decided Karen needed to understand exactly who she was messing with. I filed an ADA discrimination complaint with the Department of Justice, documenting every incident of harassment targeting my father's disability. I screen captured every social media post, saved every fake citation, and compiled a timeline showing a clear pattern of discriminatory enforcement. Then I made a phone call that would change everything. Millbrook Limestone and Aggregate? Hi, this is Jake Morrison. I own mineral rights under a residential development, and I'm interested in discussing extraction options. The silence on the other end stretched just long enough for me to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Then, Mr. Morrison, we'd be very interested in scheduling a consultation. When would be convenient for a site survey? While Karen was organizing her petition to restrict non-resident lake access and recruiting allies for her harassment campaign, I was meeting with professional geologists who confirmed what my grandfather had known decades ago. The limestone under Pine Ridge Estates wasn't just valuable, it was some of the highest quality building stone in the region. I started surveying the mineral rights boundaries with professional equipment, the rhythmic beeping of the instruments echoing across the water like a countdown timer. Every measurement, every soil sample, every geological assessment was another nail in Karen's coffin. The local newspaper picked up the story about lake access restrictions, and suddenly Karen's little harassment campaign was getting attention she hadn't bargained for. Veterans organizations started asking questions. The tourism board expressed concerns about public access limitations. 3 county commissioners received calls from constituents who'd never heard of Pine Ridge Estates but understood the principle of public land rights. Karen thought she was fighting a battle against 2 guys with fishing poles. She had no idea she'd declared war on an entire community. Karen's desperation was starting to show, and desperate people do stupid things. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday when my phone rang with that particular ringtone that means trouble. Dad was already up, making coffee in that methodical way he'd perfected over 40 years of military-precise mornings. 911 Dispatch received a call about aggressive trespassers threatening residents at Pine Ridge Estates. The officer said, "Caller described 2 suspicious men with camping equipment acting hostile toward homeowners. We're en route to investigate." My stomach dropped. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're just—" "Sir, please remain calm and stay exactly where you are. Units will be on scene in 3 minutes." Dad looked up from his coffee, that familiar expression crossing his face, the same one he'd worn during Tet offensive briefings when incoming intelligence didn't match ground truth. "Karen?" he asked. "Karen," I confirmed. We were still at the kitchen table when 2 squad cars pulled into the boat launch, emergency lights painting the morning mist in red and blue. Through the window, I could see Karen standing beside her golf cart, arms crossed like she was supervising a drug bust, iPhone out and recording everything for her social media audience. The officers approached with hands resting casually on their belts, ready but not aggressive. Professional, the kind of cops who'd done this dance before and could smell bullshit from 50 yards. "Morning, gentlemen," the sergeant said, notepad already out. "We received a report about aggressive behavior and possible trespassing. Mind if we ask what you're doing here?" I handed him our documentation, public land boundaries, fishing licenses, Dad's veteran ID. "Just fishing, officer. Same spot we've used for 6 months, same time every week." The sergeant glanced at the papers, then at Dad in his wheelchair, then at our modest fishing setup. The static crackle of his radio filled the silence as he studied Karen's written complaint. "Ma'am," he called over to Karen, "you reported aggressive trespassers threatening residents?" Karen's voice rose to that pitch that makes dogs howl. "They've been camping here for weeks, setting up unauthorized structures. I have documentation of repeated violations." The officer's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. In my environmental consulting work, I'd learned to read bureaucratic faces, and this one said he'd heard Karen's voice before. "Sir," the sergeant said to me quietly, "has this woman been harassing you previously?" 20 minutes later, Karen was getting a lecture about filing false police reports while I was getting a business card with the officer's direct number. Turns out the sergeant remembered Karen from 3 previous emergency call complaints about minorities and veterans, all completely unfounded. Pattern harassment targeting protected classes can become a federal civil rights violation, he explained, his body cam capturing every word. Filing false police reports is a misdemeanor in most states, but pattern harassment can become a federal civil rights violation. You might want to consider formal charges. But Karen's 911 gambit had backfired spectacularly. The officer's body cam footage would become key evidence, and more importantly, she'd revealed just how far she was willing to go. 2 hours after the police left, Karen hired a private security company to patrol the public areas. Rent-a-cops in fake military gear, strutting around with clipboards and claiming citizens arrest authority for trespassing. One of them actually tried to physically remove our tackle box, claiming it was abandoned property. That's when I served Karen with a federal harassment cease and desist order, delivered by a process server who found her measuring someone's lawn with a ruler at 7 a.m. The look on her face was worth every penny of legal fees. I also filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all her 911 calls from the past year. Public records are beautiful things, especially when they document someone's descent into petty tyranny. But the real development came from my environmental expertise. While documenting Karen's harassment, I'd noticed something that made my professional alarm bells ring. The shoreline around Pine Ridge Estates looked wrong. Too uniform, too high, too obviously modified. Soil samples confirmed my suspicions. Karen's husband had dumped illegal fill in protected wetlands during construction, raising the buildable area by 3 feet and extending several lots into what should have been untouchable habitat. The EPA has jurisdiction over lakefront violations, and restoration requirements could force partial demolition of several properties. The sweet smell of regulatory justice was in the air, mixed with the pine scent that had always meant home to my family. Meanwhile, the community was mobilizing. Veterans groups announced a fishing solidarity event for the following weekend. Local businesses started refusing service to known harassment supporters. Turns out Karen's reputation preceded her at the hardware store and gas station. County commissioners scheduled an emergency hearing on lake access after receiving dozens of calls from constituents. The regional newspaper sent an investigative reporter who spent 2 days interviewing longtime residents. The story that emerged wasn't about property values or fishing rights. It was about wealthy newcomers using intimidation and fake authority to eliminate public access that had existed for generations. Karen thought she was winning a war against 2 guys with fishing poles. She didn't realize she'd started a fight with an entire way of life. While Karen was busy playing sheriff with her rent-a-cops, I was making the discovery that would change everything. It happened on a rainy Tuesday night, the kind of November evening when normal people curl up with Netflix and hot chocolate. But I was hunched over my grandfather's old desk, surrounded by manila folders and coffee-stained documents that smelled like basement storage and forgotten secrets. That's when I found the 1,952 easement agreement buried beneath 40 years of tax records. My hands actually shook as I read the faded typewriter text. When my grandfather sold the Pine Ridge land to developers, he hadn't just kept the mineral rights, she'd negotiated something far more valuable. A permanent easement guaranteeing public lake access in perpetuity, with specific language protecting fishing rights for area residents and their invited guests. But here's the kicker. The easement granted my family as the original landowner's specific authority to maintain and enforce that public access. Any interference with those rights constituted breach of property covenant, giving me legal grounds to remove obstacles and charge violators for enforcement costs. Karen wasn't just harassing random fishermen. She was violating a legally binding contract that every Pine Ridge homeowner had unknowingly agreed to when they bought their properties. Property easements run with the land forever. If current owners don't know about them, they're still legally binding. I called Sarah immediately, despite the late hour. "You need to see this," I said, phone wedged between my shoulder and ear while I photographed pages. Grandpa didn't just sell land, he sold it with a legal trapdoor. The implications hit me like cold lake water. Karen's entire harassment campaign was built on a foundation of ignorance. Every fake citation, every blocked access point, every intimidation tactic was documented evidence of covenant violation. She'd been breaking the law while claiming to enforce it. But the rabbit hole went deeper. Sarah's research into Karen's husband's finances revealed something that made my environmental consultant brain light up like a Christmas tree. The EPA investigation I discovered wasn't just about back taxes, it was about $3.2 million in pending fines for unauthorized lakefront modifications across 3 different projects. Insurance wouldn't cover intentional violations, meaning Karen's house wasn't just collateral for business loans. It was the only thing standing between her family and complete financial ruin. And here I sat, holding mineral rights worth $2.3 million, plus legal authority to enforce public access that Karen had been systematically violating for months. The musty smell of old legal documents had never been so sweet. I leaned back in grandfather's chair and finally understood his strategy. He hadn't just protected the family fishing spothed, created a legal mechanism to ensure public access could never be eliminated by wealthy developers. The mineral rights were his insurance policy, but the easement was his legacy. Karen thought she was fighting to protect property values. What she'd actually done was provide me with months of documented evidence that her entire neighborhood was in violation of their property covenants. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Karen's voice was tight with panic. "We need to talk." "About what, Karen?" I think there might have been some misunderstandings. Maybe we can work something out privately." The desperation was obvious. Her lawyer had finally explained her legal exposure, and Karen was realizing that her social media harassment campaign had created a paper trail that could destroy her. "Karen," I said, watching rain streak down the window, "tomorrow, I'm filing formal notice of intent to exercise my mineral rights. You might want to read your property deed real carefully." The silence stretched for 30 seconds before she hung up. I'd gone from being the victim of petty harassment to holding all the cards in this game, but the best part? Karen had dealt them to me herself, one fake citation at a time. The next morning, my kitchen table looked like mission control for the most satisfying legal operation in Minnesota history. Sarah arrived first, her briefcase bulging with research that would make a law professor weep with joy. "Jake," she said, spreading documents across the coffee-stained wood, "I've been practicing environmental law for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Your grandfather was either a genius or a prophet." Mike the surveyor showed up an hour later, boots still muddy from walking the property lines. "Those mineral boundaries run right under 9 houses," he announced, unrolling maps that looked like battle plans. "Including Karen's. If you activate extraction rights, you can legally access every square foot." Then came Tom from Millbrook Limestone and Aggregate, a guy who'd been blasting rock since before I was born. He took one look at the geological reports and whistled low. "Premium limestone, 18-foot seam, perfect for construction grade. We're talking $2.3 million in extraction value, minimum." Finally, Maria from the Veterans Advocacy Center arrived with a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "Your father's case isn't just harassment," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought bureaucracy for 2 decades. "It's systematic discrimination against disabled veterans using public facilities." The strategy session felt like assembling the Avengers, if the Avengers specialized in property law and strategic revenge. "Phase 1, Sarah explained, pointing at a timeline she'd sketched on my whiteboard. "We establish legal standing through easement enforcement, file violation lawsuits against the HOA, request immediate injunction against access interference. Phase 2, Mike added, "We begin mineral rights assessment requiring surface access. Completely legal, completely unstoppable." Phase 3, Tom continued, "We offer buyouts to residents before quarrying begins, market rate plus 20% for voluntary sales." Phase 4, Maria finished, "We convert the land to public park with federal conservation grants. Your father gets his fishing spot, the community gets permanent access, and Karen gets a valuable lesson in property law." The coffee got stronger as the morning wore on, and our plans got more detailed. Legal takeaway: mineral rights holders can access their property even if it requires crossing someone else's land surface. Owners must allow reasonable access. Sarah filed the easement violation lawsuit against Pine Ridge Estates HOA, requesting $50,000 in damages for systematic interference with public access. We served subpoenas for all of Karen's harassment documentation, including every social media post, every fake citation, every threatening phone call. I prepared mineral rights extraction permits through the county, a process that would require geological surveys, environmental impact assessments, and surface access across the entire development. All completely legal, all completely devastating to property values. The financial planning was almost too good to be true. Federal land conservation grants could cover up to $800,000 for wetlands restoration projects. Property buyout estimates came to $1.8 million for willing sellers. Legal fees would be covered by easement violation damages. Financial takeaway: conservation easements can provide tax benefits up to 50% of adjusted gross income when donating development rights to government. Community coordination happened faster than I'd imagined. Veterans groups organized the Fishing Rights Festival for the county hearing date. Environmental groups filed amicus briefs supporting easement enforcement. The tourism board calculated that restricted lake access was costing the county $400,000 annually in lost revenue. Local businesses pledged food and supplies for legal supporters. Bob, the old fisherman, became our unofficial town crier, spreading word through the network of longtime residents who'd been quietly seething about Karen's harassment campaign. The technical preparation revealed just how screwed Karen really was. Geological surveys confirmed limestone quality exceeded expectations. Environmental impact assessments showed quarrying would actually benefit the ecosystem by removing illegal fill from protected wetlands. Environmental takeaway: restoring illegally filled wetlands often requires developers to pay triple damages plus restoration costs. Wetlands restoration plans included removing all the construction debris Karen's husband had dumped during development. Public park designs featured accessible fishing platforms, environmental education centers, and memorial areas honoring local veterans. Meanwhile, Karen hired an expensive property rights attorney from the Twin Cities and attempted to rally the neighborhood against what she called outside agitators. She proposed a private settlement to avoid public embarrassment and severed per settlement to avoid public embarrassment, threatened to sue the county for selective enforcement. Too little, too late. The sound of our surveying equipment beeping across her precious development had become her daily soundtrack, a mechanical countdown to the end of her reign of harassment. The smell of fresh printed geological reports mixed with the pine scent drifting through my kitchen windows. Dad wheeled over to examine the park plans, his weathered fingers tracing the accessible pathways and fishing platforms. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. "He always said the best revenge is making sure the bullies can't hurt anyone else." I looked at the documents spread across the table: legal briefs, geological surveys, community support letters, and realized we weren't just fighting for fishing rights anymore. We were fighting for the principle that public access belongs to everyone, not just whoever has the biggest wallet and the loudest voice. Karen's desperation was about to reach criminal levels. I discovered the first act of sabotage on a foggy Monday morning when I arrived to check our surveying stakes. 3 of them had been pulled up and thrown into the lake overnight, their bright orange flags floating like surrender banners on the dark water. But Karen had made a crucial mistake. He'd forgotten about the trail cameras I'd positioned after her previous harassment attempts. The footage was pure gold. Karen, captured in crisp high definition at 2:17 a.m., wearing dark clothing and skulking around our survey markers like some suburban ninja. She'd brought a crowbar and everything, prying up the stakes with the methodical determination of someone who'd clearly planned this operation. But destroying survey markers wasn't enough for her. Destroying survey markers is a felony in most states, often carrying penalties of $10,000 or more and up to 5 years in prison. She'd escalated from misdemeanor harassment to serious criminal activity. 2 nights later, she topped herself. Security footage caught her dumping used motor oil near the public fishing area, creating an environmental hazard that would cost thousands to clean up properly. The acrid smell of petroleum contaminating clean lake water made my environmental consultant blood boil with rage that went beyond personal revenge. Then she tried to break into my truck. The metallic clang of someone forcing the door handle woke me at 3 a.m. By the time I got to the window, she was rifling through my glove compartment, obviously hunting for survey documents or legal papers. What she found instead was my truck's GPS tracker recording her license plate and a motion-activated camera documenting her attempted theft. But Karen's most revealing moment came through an unexpected source, her own neighbor. Mrs. Peterson called me on a Thursday afternoon, her voice trembling with the kind of controlled anger that comes from decades of keeping quiet about bullies. "Mr. Morrison, I need to tell you something about Linda Whitmore." The elderly woman had been secretly recording Karen's threats and rants for months. Turns out Karen had threatened to call animal control on Mrs. Peterson's small dog if she didn't support the harassment campaign. She'd also planted evidence of camping violations by scattering empty beer cans near our fishing spot, then photographing them for her social media army. "She's been planning to frame you, Mrs. Peterson explained, her hands shaking as she played back audio recordings. "Said she'd make it look like you and your father were living in that tent permanently." The recording quality was crystal clear. Karen's voice outlining plans to plant sleeping bags and personal items around our fishing area, then call county officials to report an illegal homeless encampment. The woman had literally planned to criminalize my disabled father's fishing therapy. Meanwhile, Karen's social media campaign reached new levels of insanity. She created fake environmental impact studies, claiming limestone quarrying would poison the entire lake ecosystem. The documents looked professional. Her husband's connections included a graphic designer who specialized in misleading corporate presentations. She distributed flyers throughout town featuring photoshopped images of industrial mining operations, complete with massive dump trucks and environmental devastation that had nothing to do with selective limestone extraction. The psychological manipulation was impressive, if completely unethical. Karen even organized a protest outside the county building, recruiting supporters with misleading signs reading "Save Our Lake" and "Stop Corporate Greed." She'd somehow convinced a dozen well-meaning environmentalists that I was planning to strip mine the entire shoreline, but her desperation led to overreach that would destroy her credibility permanently. Local television news arrived to cover her protest, expecting a David versus Goliath story about environmental protection. What they found instead was a wealthy suburban woman screaming about property values, while my disabled veteran father sat quietly fishing in the background. The reporter, a sharp young woman who'd clearly done her homework, asked pointed questions that made Karen's facade crumble in real time. Mrs. Whitmore, aren't you the same person who called 911 to report a disabled veteran as a suspicious trespasser? Karen's response, captured live on camera, was a masterpiece of self-destruction. Well, you have to understand, people like that affect our community standards. The phrase, people like that, echoed across social media within hours. Regional veterans organizations shared the clip with outrage. Environmental groups realized they'd been manipulated and withdrew their support. Even Karen's neighbors started distancing themselves from her increasingly erratic behavior. I filed additional criminal complaints for evidence tampering and vandalism, complete with high-definition video documentation of every incident. The Freedom of Information Act request revealed Karen had made 14 false 911 calls in 6 months, all targeting minorities, veterans, or working-class families. But the most devastating discovery came from EPA investigators who'd been quietly working the wetlands violations case. Soil samples proved Karen's husband had dumped construction debris in protected areas, and wildlife cameras showed his illegal lighting was disrupting migratory bird patterns. The taste of victory was getting stronger every day, seasoned with the knowledge that Karen had provided every piece of evidence needed to destroy her own case. Karen's final gambit was both brilliant and completely insane. She hired a Chicago public relations firm, the kind that specializes in crisis management for corporations caught dumping toxic waste. Within 48 hours, glossy flyers appeared throughout Millbrook, featuring professional photography and environmental buzzwords that would make Greenpeace weep. "Save Millbrook Lake from corporate mining," the headline screamed, complete with stock photos of environmental devastation that had nothing to do with selective limestone extraction. Karen had created a fake grassroots organization called Millbrook Environmental Protection Alliance, with herself as executive director, and a website that looked like it had been designed by actual activists. The smell of fresh ink and expensive paper filled every coffee shop and community bulletin board as Karen's propaganda blitz reached every corner of town. She'd even recruited real environmental groups by sending them misleading information about massive industrial quarrying operations, carefully omitting the part about small-scale limestone extraction from her husband's illegally developed land. But Karen's masterstroke was the bribery attempt. I found out about it through pure luck. County Commissioner Bradley mentioned it during a casual conversation at the hardware store, thinking I already knew. "Strange thing," he said while examining drill bits, "that Whitmore woman offered to fund my entire re-election campaign if I could delay your mineral rights hearing." My blood went cold. "She offered you money?" "Oh, she was clever about it. Called it a community investment and supporting local leadership. But when someone's waving a $20,000 check and asking for specific official actions, he shrugged. I've been in politics long enough to recognize a bribe. Attempting to bribe elected officials is a federal felony punishable by up to 15 years in prison, even if the official doesn't accept. Karen had just graduated from harassment to corruption charges. The beautiful irony was that her bribery attempt was recorded. Commissioner Bradley had developed the habit of recording all his constituent meetings after a previous scandal, and Karen's campaign contribution conversation was captured in crisp digital audio. But Karen wasn't finished destroying herself. She launched personal attacks that revealed the true ugliness beneath her suburban facade. She contacted my environmental consulting clients, claiming I was mentally unstable and obsessed with revenge fantasies. She spread rumors about my father being exploited by his own son and called Adult Protective Services to investigate whether a disabled veteran was being manipulated for legal purposes. The APS investigation lasted exactly one interview. The caseworker took one look at my father, sharp, dignified, and more mentally competent than most people half his age, and closed the file with a note about frivolous complaints motivated by personal disputes. Karen even filed a frivolous lawsuit, claiming I was causing her emotional distress through systematic harassment and intimidation. The complaint read like psychological projection, describing her own behavior while claiming to be the victim. Meanwhile, the real environmental groups had discovered they'd been manipulated, and their response was swift and devastating. The Minnesota Environmental Coalition issued a public statement withdrawing support for Karen's fake organization and endorsing my wetlands restoration project. Dr. Sarah, a wetlands ecologist from the University of Minnesota, provided expert testimony that selective limestone extraction would actually benefit the ecosystem by removing illegal construction debris and restoring natural water flow patterns. The political pressure was building beyond Karen's ability to control. Our state representative visited the lake after receiving constituent complaints about restricted public access. The EPA announced a formal investigation of Pine Ridge Estates. The Department of Justice was reviewing ADA discrimination complaints. The Veterans Affairs Office provided legal support for my father's civil rights case. Regional television news had turned Karen into a cautionary tale about wealthy newcomers trying to eliminate public access to natural resources. The viral social media video of her screaming at my wheelchair-bound father had been shared by national veterans advocacy groups. Environmental law professors were using our case as a teaching example of how mineral rights and conservation easements can protect public resources from private encroachment. But Karen's complete meltdown came during a town hall meeting she'd organized to rally support for her fake environmental cause. 50 people showed up expecting to hear about protecting the lake. What they got instead was Karen's unhinged rant about outside agitators and environmental terrorists trying to destroy property values. She accused me of bribing EPA officials, claimed my father was faking his disability for sympathy, and suggested that limestone quarrying was part of a socialist conspiracy to eliminate private property rights. The nervous energy in the room was palpable as longtime residents realized they were watching someone have a public breakdown. When Bob, the old fisherman, stood up and quietly explained that my grandfather had fished this lake for 60 years before Karen ever heard of Minnesota, the room turned against her completely. Karen stormed out of her own meeting, leaving behind a room full of people who finally understood they'd been manipulated by someone who viewed their community as her personal kingdom. The sound of her car doors slamming echoed across the parking lot like the closing of a coffin. The county commissioner's hearing was standing room only, packed with 150 people who turned out to witness the end of Karen's reign of harassment. Local TV news cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights painting the room in the glow of public accountability. Outside, protesters held signs on both sides, Karen's dwindling supporters with their "Save Our Property Values" placards facing off against veterans groups carrying "Public Access for All" banners. The atmosphere crackled with nervous energy as Karen arrived with her expensive legal team, a convoy of black SUVs that screamed desperate rich people throwing money at a lost cause. She'd hired 3 attorneys from Minneapolis, plus a crisis management consultant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. County Attorney Johnson called the hearing to order at 2 p.m. sharp. "We're here to address complaints regarding public access easements, mineral rights enforcement, and allegations of systematic harassment." Karen's lead attorney stood first, a silver-haired man in a suit that cost more than most people's cars. "Commissioners, my client represents the legitimate property rights of hard-working homeowners being threatened by environmental extremism and frivolous legal attacks." He presented his case with all the polish money could buy: PowerPoint slides about property values, charts showing economic impact, even a hired expert who claimed limestone extraction would permanently destroy the delicate ecosystem balance. But when he finished, you could feel the room's skepticism. Karen had burned too many bridges, lied too many times, and harassed too many people for expensive lawyers to rehabilitate her reputation. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with a single folder containing everything I needed to destroy Karen's case. "Commissioners, this isn't about property rights or environmental protection. This is about one person trying to eliminate public access that's been guaranteed by law for 70 years. I clicked to my first slide, grandfather's original easement agreement, blown up large enough for everyone to read. In 1952, when Pine Ridge Estates was developed, my grandfather negotiated permanent public lake access in perpetuity. Every property owner agreed to these terms when they bought their homes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people realized Karen had been violating legally binding agreements. My second slide was the trail camera footage of Karen destroying survey markers at 2 a.m. The high-definition video showed her face clearly as she used a crowbar to vandalize official surveying equipment. "This is felony destruction of property, captured on camera." Karen's face went white as the footage played. My third slide was the recording of her attempted bribery of Commissioner Bradley. Her voice filled the room. "I'm prepared to make a substantial campaign contribution, $20,000 if we can find a way to delay this mining nonsense." The gasp from the audience was audible. Even Karen's own lawyers looked stunned. But my final slide was the mic drop moment that ended everything. "Commissioners, Mrs. R. Whitmore has spent months claiming to protect the environment, while her husband's company illegally dumped construction debris in protected wetlands. I clicked to aerial photos showing the environmental damage. The EPA investigation has confirmed $3.2 million in violations, and Mrs. Whitmore's harassment campaign was designed to prevent discovery of these crimes. Karen exploded. "This is a conspiracy," she shrieked, jumping to her feet despite her lawyer's attempts to restrain her. "He's bribing everyone, the EPA, the veterans groups, even the newspapers. This is about destroying good people who work hard and pay taxes." Her voice rose to that pitch that makes dogs howl and children cry. "We built a beautiful community, and these people want to destroy it with their environmental terrorism and socialist land grabs." Commissioner Bradley banged his gavel. "Ma'am, please control yourself, or you'll be removed from the chamber." But Karen was beyond control. "You don't understand. People like that don't belong in our community. They're destroying everything we've worked for." There it was again. People like that. The phrase that had already destroyed her credibility, now repeated in front of cameras and 150 witnesses. Security escorted her out as she continued screaming about conspiracies and environmental terrorists. Her expensive lawyers followed with the resigned expressions of professionals who'd just watched their client commit legal suicide. The witness testimony that followed was devastating. Mrs. Peterson described months of intimidation. Police Sergeant Martinez detailed the pattern of false 911 calls. Dr. Sarah explained how limestone extraction would actually improve water quality by removing illegal fill. Then my father spoke. He wheeled to the microphone with the quiet dignity that had carried him through 4 decades since Vietnam. "I didn't serve my country so wealthy bullies could eliminate public access to our natural resources," he said simply. "This lake belongs to everyone, not just people who can afford million-dollar houses." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. The commissioner's vote was unanimous. Immediate injunction against interference with public access, $50,000 fine against Pine Ridge Estates HOA, and criminal referrals for evidence tampering and attempted bribery. Legal takeaway. When property rights conflict, courts generally favor public access and environmental protection over private exclusion. Karen's house went up for sale before the hearing ended. 3 weeks later, the for sale sign in Karen's front yard looked like a white flag of surrender. She and her husband packed their McMansion with the frantic desperation of people fleeing a crime scene. U-Haul trucks rumbled through Pine Ridge Estates as the Whitmores liquidated their suburban kingdom, selling furniture at garage sale prices and avoiding eye contact with neighbors who'd finally realized they'd been living next to a sociopath. The criminal charges stuck. Karen pled guilty to evidence tampering and paid $25,000 in civil damages for harassment. Her husband's development company folded under EPA fines, and their house became collateral for business loans they couldn't repay. Within 6 months, they'd relocated to some gated community in Florida, where Karen immediately began new HOA disputes with fresh victims. But our story was just beginning. 5 families from Pine Ridge Estates accepted my buyout offers at 120% of market value, plus relocation assistance that helped them find better homes without the stench of environmental violations. The remaining residents organized a neighborhood council to manage the transition from exclusive development to community-integrated lakefront. The limestone quarrying began in spring, a carefully managed operation that looked nothing like Karen's apocalyptic propaganda. Professional geologists extracted high-quality building stone with minimal environmental impact, generating $2.1 million in revenue over 3 years while actually improving the ecosystem. Federal conservation grants totaling $800,000 funded the wetlands restoration project that removed illegal construction debris and replanted native vegetation. Local workers earned good wages, restoring what Karen's husband had destroyed, and the lake began returning to its natural state for the first time in decades. The transformation was remarkable. Where Karen's golf cart once patrolled like an armored vehicle, children now played on accessible beaches. The Environmental Education Center, built from quarrying revenues, became a destination for school groups and nature lovers. The Veterans Memorial Fishing Pier, dedicated to my father's generation, provided wheelchair-accessible platforms overlooking water that ran cleaner than it had in 20 years. Dad's PTSD symptoms improved dramatically as his weekly fishing sessions became daily visits to his lake. The sound of children's laughter replaced Karen's shrill complaints, and the sight of eagles nesting in restored wetlands proved that environmental restoration could coexist with public access. My environmental consulting business exploded with positive publicity. Clients across the Midwest hired me to investigate mineral rights and easement violations, creating a specialty practice in community-supported conservation. The legal precedent we'd established helped other families fight access restrictions imposed by wealthy developers. Granddad's Conservation Scholarship now supports environmental studies, students at 3 state universities, funded by the Quarrying Endowment. Annual grants provide outdoor therapy programs for veterans dealing with PTSD, proving that grandfather's insurance policy had grown into something larger than anyone imagined. The lake restoration became a model for similar projects statewide. Environmental groups use our case study to demonstrate how mineral rights and conservation easements can protect public resources from private encroachment. Legislative hearings referenced our victory when strengthening public access laws. Most satisfying of all, the annual Lake Access Festival celebrates what we fought to preserve. Veterans' families, longtime residents, and newcomers who understand community values gather each September to fish, swim, and remember that some things belong to everyone. But the real victory was smaller and more personal. Last Tuesday, I watched my father teach my neighbor's grandson how to tie a fishing knot, both of them laughing as the boy's clumsy fingers struggled with the line. The smell of pine needles warming in morning sun, the sound of loons calling across clean water, the taste of coffee shared between generations, this is what we'd really been fighting for. Karen thought she was protecting property values. What she'd actually done was give us the perfect opportunity to prove that communities are stronger than individual greed. My phone's ringing now, a family in Oregon facing similar HOA harassment, asking for help with what sounds suspiciously like Native American burial grounds that need protection from development. Dad's already suggesting a road trip, and I can see that familiar glint in his eye that means another bully is about to learn why you don't mess with people who understand the difference between owning land and belonging to it. Share your worst HOA horror story in the comments. I read every single one, and who knows, maybe your fight is next. And hit that subscribe button if you want to see us help more families take back their communities from petty tyrants. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better.